This presentation will act as a summary of all the key information that you might need to answer a question on the Archers, which is one of the texts from Component 1 Section B of your exam. One of the key areas that it is absolutely fundamental you understand in order to analyse the Archers as a text is the idea of the BBC as a public service broadcaster. Most broadcasters are commercial, such as ITV on TV or on the radio Capital Heart. They are funded largely through advertising. The BBC is different. As a public service broadcaster, it is funded entirely by the people that it serves. And in this case, it is funded via a compulsory licence fee. Everybody with a television in this country must pay it. There are, of course, some exemptions to the licence fee. Currently, over 75s don't pay anything. This will soon be changing. The current government are looking to make over 75s pay it, although that has been postponed in the wake of the coronavirus. Blind people only pay 50% of the fee, and anyone watching on a black and white TV pays just £52 a year. With their role as a public service broadcaster, given that they are funded by the public, comes a set of responsibilities. The three main principles as part of the BBC's core mission is to educate, inform, and to entertain. On top of that, they have 5 important public purposes. The first, to provide impartial news, to be non-biased in any way. They must support learning for people of all ages. They wish to be creative and to create high quality and distinctive output. Importantly, with regards to the Archers, they must seek to reflect, represent and serve the diverse communities of the UK. And of course, the UK's community is changing all the time, and the BBC must change its output in order to reflect that. Everybody pays for it, therefore everybody must be represented as part of the BBC's programming. And finally, to reflect the UK, its culture and values to the world. It's important that you understand how the Archers fits as part of the BBC's purpose. How does the Archers help the BBC to achieve its aims and objectives? Well, first of all, if we take to educate, when the show was first broadcast in the early 1950s, its function was primarily to educate a post-war Britain about agriculture and farming methods. The objective was to increase food production during a period of rationing after the war. To entertain, well, of course, The Archers is a soap opera, and if you consider soap operas on the TV, their primary function is as a form of entertainment. Despite their tendency to reflect real life, they are there to entertain us. If we consider the 5 core principles then, to reflect, represent and serve the diverse communities of all the UK's nations and regions. Well, on The Archers, the show introduced its first gay married couple to reflect, I suppose, the increased diversity and representation of the LGBT community in Britain. Migrant workers to reflect the ever-changing nature of Britain's workforce. A range of ethnicities represented in the show, although it is still quite white middle class. Stories such as drug use, domestic abuse, loss and grief in order to reflect the interests and concerns of the broadest possible audience. It's important that you understand why The Archers is broadcast at this time. Well, 7 p.m. is an appropriate time given that this is an audience of working age. Most people are out at work during the day. Therefore 7 p.m, that time when people are just getting in from work or indeed are driving home from work and can listen to it in the car, is important. The 2 p.m. repeat each day, perhaps for those people with families. working mothers, for example, or stay-at-home mothers who are looking after the children in the evening but might get an opportunity to watch it at 2 p.m. each day. It's important that you consider the way in which digital technology has influenced the Archers and radio in general. We live in a society now which is increasingly online, and digital radio means that shows such as the Archers can be streamed direct to a range of devices. That is important because it is important that the BBC provides output that people can listen to on the move. This is a society which is increasingly active and on the move. The individual episodes or the omnibus are available as a podcast, so you can listen to one episode at a time, or the omnibus all in one run. Again, crucial for a society which is very, very busy, a working population which doesn't always have the time day to day. Catch-up TV, catch-up radio has become an increasingly common part of British society, and it seeks to serve the needs of a changing population. It's important that you consider the benefits or drawbacks of listening to the podcast for audiences and producers. Of course, if a show is dealing with topics which are relevant to the day, then listening on a podcast, those issues will already be out of date. The show will be in the news, perhaps online on social media. Trying to avoid that in order to listen to it on a podcast is going to be important for the audience. Think about how social media can be used also. It is not just about broadcasting the show. A social media presence, the Archers is present on Twitter and Facebook, for example, allows the show to interact with its audience and for the audience to create a sense of community surrounding the show. We'll look at that in more detail later. The Archers is, of course, a soap opera, and it's important that you understand the conventions of the form. Soap operas began in the USA in the 1930s. They got their name from the fact that they were sponsored by companies selling domestic products such as soap. Traditionally, soap operas appeal mainly to female audiences, and The Archers is appealing mainly to a female audience. They often have a strong female character or a matriarch. And if you think about examples from the television, Peggy Mitchell would be a perfect example in EastEnders, running the pub, the centre, the hub of the community. She is that central, strong female character. Another key convention of soap operas is that they have a multi-stranded narrative. They have several stories operating at the same time. The Archers has a number of central locations within its world. The village shop, the Bull, which is the pub. All soap operas have a pub as the centre of its community, the hub of its community. We have Grey Gables, the country house hotel, and Home Farm, the farm in Ambridge, where much of the action takes place. Soap operas aim to create a version of reality. They are supposed to look like real life, and this creation of real life is called verisimilitude. They take place in a few recognisable locations. They look real, and the stories revolve around real issues concerning families and relationships. They are places and issues and activities which we recognise and can relate to. The storylines of soap operas have to and often do reflect the issues of real life. Brexit was mentioned quite frequently 2 years ago in the show, and sometimes scripts are rewritten to reflect what is happening in the real world. It would be no surprise at all if coronavirus gets a mention at some point in the future. Although you will be answering on this text in relation to audience and industries, you are required to have one set episode, and the episode we have studied is from the 23rd of February 2018. It is the episode where Nick Grundy dies of sepsis. And it is important that you make that reference when you are referring to the show in your answers. This slide gives you an understanding of the Grundy family. Joe, if you like, is that patriarch. He is the head of the family. He is father to Eddie and Alf. Eddie married to Clary, and their sons Will and Ed, and their daughter Emma. And it is Will who is married to Nick Grundy. Nick Grundy is the character who dies in our episode. A quick recap then of the episode that you've already listened to. Eddie Grundy, Will's father, is on the farm at the start of the episode, and it's lambing season. Will Grundy is in hospital, and the nurse has a conversation with Will about Nick's sepsis and discusses the seriousness of the situation, possible organ failure and life support. And Will is largely surprised by the news and struggles to take it in. We then go back to the farm where they are saving a newborn lamb, so there is a correlation, if you like, between the action on the farm and the action in the hospital. Will calls Eddie and tells him to bring the children and Nick's mum Beverly to the hospital. We then go back to the hospital where Will is with Joe, his grandfather. The children go to see Nick and then leave. And Nick instructs Will to go and see them, so she is left with Joe. She tells Joe that she won't be going to heaven and tries to reveal the truth of an affair that she's had. We don't hear this, but we can tell from Joe's reaction, and he won't believe her. He believes in her goodness. And it's at that point that she goes into cardiac arrest. We then switch to the waiting room where the nurse reveals Nick's death to the family. And then for my class, this is where the inappropriately cheery Archer's music starts and you all start laughing. Let's look in more detail then at the BBC's role as a public service broadcaster. Their role goes beyond producing programmes. They have to represent and look after the communities that they serve. And following the episode with Nick Grundy's death, the website looked very much like this. And as you can see, there is lots of information there about sepsis. They are looking to inform or educate, if you like, their audience about this issue. So we get a page, how did Nick develop sepsis and how could her life have been saved? This is an information page. It informs the audience about what to look out for, what are the dangers, so that they can best protect themselves. There may be listeners who are going through this themselves, so the BBC is there to represent them, to look after them in some way. We get this information page, and there are 250,000 cases of sepsis in the UK every year, killing more people than breast, bowel and prostate cancer combined. This is a relevant issue. It was certainly in the news at the time. And so the BBC seeks to educate its audience about the issue in the hope that perhaps they will relate to it and save lives. As you so often see after a major issue in a soap opera, the BBC looks to provide support for anyone who is affected by the storyline. There's the BBC Action Line, numbers you can call, Crew's Bereavement Care and the Bereavement Trust, the UK Sepsis Trust. They're looking to inform and educate their audience, to provide a support network for their audience. They are doing much, much more than just broadcasting the show. Of course, then we look at the way in which social media allows audiences to react with the show. And they start sharing their response to the show's issues and start sharing their own personal experience of illness and grief and loss. And we look at the hashtags that are used here. The first hashtag is hashtag the Archers. We then see hashtag the Archers broke me. Through the use of these hashtags are used to create a sense of community. So here is the Archers audiences creating a family of listeners, if you like, becoming part of a community. If we think about uses and gratifications theory, this would be a perfect example of not only personal identity but community too, personal relationships. And there is that hashtag, the Archers broke me, and somebody has, in a heartfelt post, shared their own personal story. This is a perfect example of personal identity. They've seen their own life reflected in the show, and it allows them in some way to come to terms with their grief or their situation. It's important not only that you listen to the set episode, but that you understand how the Archers website is used as a promotional tool and a way of engaging with its audience. The website is used to help the audience feel part of this Archers community, this Archers family. The Archers has a long-standing and dedicated audience. Many of them have listened for several decades, and they want to feel part of that community. This is the Archers homepage. This is what it looks like. So obviously we get the latest episode. We also get the coming up, which is a little snapshot of what is to come next. Some of the pages here, it's important that you think about how the BBC is using this website. Now we could take, I think I may have depression. Well, this is an article which is speaking to its audience. There will be many, many audience members going through this issue, and they see themselves reflected in this particular issue in the show. The BBC Action Line Mental Health Information and Support. This one is also significant. Mental health issues on the rise. This is about the BBC and the show representing its audience and engaging with it. Here we have the Archers Quiz of the Year. Now, the Archers Quiz of the Year allows the audience to feel knowledgeable. If they feel knowledgeable, they recognise themselves as a super fan, if you like. And that makes them feel much, much more part of the show. It raises their status, if you like. How to Be More Debbie. This is about connecting with the characters. If we think about uses and gratifications, this is about personal identity, seeing some of yourself reflected in the character. The 10 Archers storylines that have made you cry. Lots of the features on this website are about nostalgia. As I said before, this is a long-standing audience, and they want to reflect on their experiences of listening to the Archers. Nostalgia is a very, very powerful feeling. It allows you to reflect on yourself and think about how the Archers has been a part of your life. And in doing that, you create loyalty to the show. This is the features page. And again, if we have a look at this, 6 moments that changed the Archers forever. How Linda became an Ambridge treasure. Joe Grundy's finest moments, remembering one of the characters. Again, we have the issue about depression, remembering Colin Skip, another former character. These features are all about creating a sense of nostalgia, of remembering what the Archers means to you, and in doing so, the BBC and the show itself create a loyalty within their audience. So as a recap, thinking about how digital technology and the Archers come together. Well, social media platforms create, build and sustain the Archers community or family through the use of hashtags such as the Archers or the Archers broke me. The website is used to inform and educate, and therefore satisfying 2 of the BBC's core objectives. The website also allows audience to build relationships with characters, developing loyalty, and it creates a sense of nostalgia for a long-standing and loyal audience. We're going to look at audience in a bit more detail now. One of the key terms to remember is RAJAR. This stands for Radio Joint Audience Research Board, and this is the audience which measures audiences in the UK. It is not to be confused with the company which regulates radio in the UK. That is Ofcom. So regulation is Ofcom. The measuring of audiences is RAJAR. The Archers is broadcast on BBC Radio 4, which states that its audience is mainly ABC 1 35 to 54-year-olds. So it is an audience which has a high level of income and is a highly educated audience. There are some Radio 4 programmes which appeal to a slightly different demographic than the average. For example, Woman's Hour is targeted almost entirely at women. Some research carried out by the University of Sussex revealed that the Archers' audience were mainly female, white British, and aged 40 to 59, so a little older than the general Radio 4 audience. If we think about diversity, that idea that the BBC must reflect the diversity of the UK, The Archers has included many features which appeal to a broader audience. So we've got characters from different social backgrounds. Brian and Jenny lived in a very big country house. Ed and Emma have been on the list for affordable housing for ages. The characters are from different age groups, in some cases 4 generations of a family. So the show is looking to reflect that broad range of UK community. Opinion leaders. Now, opinion leaders are people that influence opinion within the UK. The Archers use Stephen Fry as an introduction to the show. Now, Stephen Fry is a familiar name. He has a big following. Not only that, he appeals to the type of audience, the ABC1 middle-aged audience that the Archers is seeking to attract. We're now going to think a little bit about audience interactivity. We are no longer audiences which simply sit back and absorb media. We interact with it. We take from it what we want. We want to be a part of the media that we interact with. So if you have a look at the website, they include things like quizzes and polls where audience members can vote on particular topics. And in this way, the audience feels part of the content. And if they feel part of the content, they feel more invested in the show. For example, social media is used to allow comments on the show. In 2017, when Matt Crawford was knocked down in a hit and run, the website said that anonymous tip-offs from the public are leading the investigation in new and surprising directions. Members of the audience began to get very involved, picking up on clues the programme's writers weren't aware of and drawing their own conclusions. So we get this blurring between fiction and reality. What we see or hear in the media sometimes becomes part of our own reality, and it's difficult to tell the difference between the two. Fandom is an idea where audiences get more involved and become almost super fans of a show. So if we take an example, Shambridge, a play on the show setting Ambridge, is a pastiche of the show. That means fans have created their own version of the programme, which is meant to honour the original, not to mock it. So people take an original media product or show and turn it into something of their own. And in that way, they become more involved. It becomes part of their identity. One of the most famous storylines concerned Rob Titchener and Helen. Rob was a controlling, abusive bully. Helen finally snapped and stabbed him. He didn't die but was seriously injured, and Helen spent time in prison on remand. The verdict was announced in an hour-long special featuring guest actors including Catherine Tate. In the aftermath of this, fans of the show set up the Helen Titchener Fund, which raised over £170,000 for the charity Refuge, which supports people in violent relationships. So we can see how the show becomes part of the wider causes of society. Any question about audiences and how audiences react with a text, it's important at GCSE to consider uses and gratifications theory. So let's have a think about the 4 key areas of uses and gratifications. The first, audience pleasure of knowledge and surveillance. Well, as we've already seen, the pages on the website relating to issues in the show, such as sepsis, depression and domestic violence, inform and educate the audience. Farming, initially, that information about farming was important to the show. That is less relevant now. Diversion is of course important. This is a soap opera. It is a fictional world. As much as it is a representation of real life, it is still a diversion from it. And many of the people in the audience will be listening for entertainment. Entertainment is a form of diversion. These two are possibly more important. Personal identity. Well, the website offers an opportunity to connect with the characters, and in connecting with the characters, we might recognise some of ourselves in them. Real life issues and emotions are reflected in the show. For example, in our set episode, Will's grief, many audience members will recognise that feeling of grief, will find something about themselves in reminiscing and reflecting on what Will is going through. And as we've already discussed, that nostalgic reflection on the past allows people to connect with their past selves and to think about how the Archers has been a part of their life and how the Archers has helped to shape them in some way. And then personal relationships. Well, social media is significant here, used to create an Archers community or family through its interaction and particularly through its hashtags. And the sense of family in the set episode creates a feeling of togetherness. I hope this presentation has been useful in some way to cement and develop your understanding of the Archers as a set text.